And what really solidified it for me, that made me feel like, oh, I can just invest into this 100%, was that there was already an ecosystem around it of other people that believed in it enough. And so it was almost like, oh, I don't need to believe in it for this to be worth something. There's a ton of people who believe in it. And so for me, I was like, okay, not only is this now an offering for people that like, hey, we can get out of the system, of this old system, but people were believing in it already, and they're already mining and they're already in it. So for me, I kind of betted on that really more than anything.
All right, Rising Man family, you're in for a real treat today. I got my bro coming in here, Mr. Oto Gomes, coming in live from outside of the Phoenix, Arizona area. I was just saying to you before we started recording, man, that this is the first conversation we've had since that iconic Sacred Sons photo that we shared. So it's good to be jamming with you here in the virtual flesh.
Literally, I mean, what was that? 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago?
I think it's got to be four. 4 feels more accurate. We've got a whole pandemic in between that moment and now. So it feels like a lifetime ago.
Literally, because I was going to say, it's like, it feels like 10 years probably because of the pandemic.
Yeah. There's no social distancing in that photo. We didn't even know what that was back then. And most people didn't even know what the heck a Bitcoin was at that point. So a lot's changed since the last time that we've been in person together. But here we are, man. Glad to be here with you again today, connecting.
It's like full circle. We're coming back together, and now like, okay, now let's discuss that picture.
Yeah, we probably could have one of our own customized memes, since our first conversation and all of those things that happen, when they do those like Sega Genesis, and all this stuff. We'll have to get our content teams on there since we share content teams.
I was going to say, just tell your guys, because it's the same guys as are my guys.
There you go. Shout out to Rowan, Mark, and Julian. Big love to you guys. Okay, man. Yeah. Let's not waste any time getting right into it. I know you know the flow here. I ask the first question of every guest. That is, what does it mean to be a man?
Ooh, what does it mean to be a man? Man, for me, it was growing out of that feeling of like that external validation, like wanting to look for my worth outside of my body. And that's probably not just for men, it's for women, it's for everybody. But for me, I really stepped into my manhood, grounded myself when I started to look at my self-worth coming from inside of me. And that it was actually that moment that I had that awareness was when I looked at money as energy and not as the thing that I was giving all my worth to. That's when it shifted for me.
This is great, man. I don't think I've ever had somebody talk about the validation shift as that key transition point between boy and man. So let's just go into that for a second. Let's not get to the money piece of it yet. But do you think that there's still a role in external validation? Is that something that we should just try to eradicate completely from our existence? Or do you think it's something that we actually need to some degree?
That's a great question. I think when it comes to, because I look at life as like, with that saying, it was Bruce Lee, I think they said, be water. Mm-hmm. And I kind of live my life like that. Like things are going to happen to me from the external, and then I have to kind of navigate through it and breathe through it and move through it instead of running away from it or trying to go around it. You want to go through it. And so I think in those moments where it's like, if I don't do this, I'm going to die. There's like survival moments. You need to kind of be aware of those external things and make sure that they're validating your concerns so that you can then move through it. But I think that's the only time really that you should give anything external any sort of power, is when it's helping you become a better version of yourself or it's helping you survive.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is one of those things where there's not a clear line. I know that the masculine in us loves clear lines of delineation. Let's make it black and white. But I think there are times in life where it comes down to, am I depending on this? Is this like a survival need to have somebody who's not me reflect something back to me that validates who I am? And for example, I think the one compelling argument for this is, well, what good is having a gift or a service to offer if there's no community to tell me how much they value that? And for people to say, wow, that's really valuable. That's validating, right? That's validating when we create this podcast and people say, yo, you and Otto killed it. That was some dope shit that you guys are dropping. It's like, okay, good. Well, that's good information for us. That's valuable. But when it transcends into I need it, right? Like I need the likes. If
And
you don't
that,
give
and
me the
that's,
hearts,
I
I'm
think
done.
that's the key right there, is like the awareness of like, okay, well, what's your intention of using that tool or doing that thing? If it is just because you want to fill the void of validation and you want to feel like worth something because you're hearing it from people, then okay, then that's a trap, you know. But if you're doing it for the intention of like, oh, I got feedback, I know what I'm supposed to do or not do. Cool, let's go ahead and do it. Then that's different. That's sort of like in my opinion, it's the difference between a forward energy movement, like a moving energy forward, or receding or like constricting. You know, where if you're really looking at it as like validation to fill the void, then you're just constricting back into yourself because you're always going to need that thing to come in.
Yeah. All right. Awesome point. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think and that's something that's not so easy to delineate. That's where that self-awareness piece comes in. So awesome. That was cool. I don't think I've ever really dropped into that particular piece with somebody before. So great start. For those people who don't know you yet, tell us a little bit more about your early startup. I know because you grew up in Brazil, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, e fala português?
Fala português.
Fala português. Eu jogo capoeira, and so I speak a little bit of Portuguese, just enough to get by, man. But
you got a good accent too. You're like, you barely see there's any accent there. Yeah.
Shout out to Pimsleur. Pimsleur is like the language. So anyway, side note, tell us about your experience growing up in Brazil, because I think that backstory is really important when we start talking about some of the things that you're into now.
Yeah. Growing up, I was born in Brazil, in São Paulo. I grew up there till I was 8 years old. And then I moved to the US when I was 8. So really most of my childhood was just me running around the house, being told what to do by my brothers and you know, maybe having fun on the streets. But growing up, the environment that I felt that I was in was not necessarily poor, but I would say lower middle class, but with the mindset of scarcity and tightness and like saving and looking for the best deal possible. Really that sort of mindset. So growing up, that's all I experienced. Now, when I came to the US at 8 years old, I barely really knew how to speak Portuguese. So I learned English very quickly, but the mindset, I quickly let go of that mindset that my parents instilled in Brazil. Because in the US, there was so much hope. There was this like mindset of, the American dream. So growing up in that system at such a young age, I was able to kind of let go of that scarcity and kind of really step into like, okay, well, there's potential, there's possibility. Where in Brazil, my brothers grew up with that, like, no, man, you got to figure out for yourself. Like, if you don't do it, if you don't grind it out, you won't get anything. And so and it's cool now to see them growing up and being at where they're at and still pursuing that same path that my parents instilled, where I went complete opposite direction.
Yeah. Well, let's actually pause here for a moment, because there's a lot of really important stuff here. I think many people whose ancestors, whether it's one generation, 2 generations, 4 generations, most people migrated to the Americas, let's just say the Western Americas and the United States area. And the legacy of scarcity is still there. I know that both of my parents were born in this country, but their parents were born in somewhere else. And so, and it's still there, right? So to hear you say that you were born in a different country, you came here and you were able to just release it, I think that's probably the 1% of the 1% story for most people. Especially even the word scarcity these days has become a buzzword. So
there's more to that story, though. There's more to that story.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's got to be something to it. So I want to hear more about how you were able to release that and let that go.
Yeah. So when I said let go, I didn't let go of it yet, but I became aware of it. I was very aware of like, whoa, my parents are like this. Mostly my dad. My mom was really went to the opposite side of the spectrum when she came to the US. My dad stayed on the side of scarcity and tightness. My mom went to the complete opposite end and just started, yay, like life is amazing and we have everything. We go to Costco and buy the bulk items and go to McDonald's and get 23-cent burgers. I mean, it was this mindset of abundance, and it was back then, in my opinion, in the mid 90s, there was a sense of abundance in the U.S. So for me, it was very obvious, the two. It was like, oh, very, very scarce in Brazil. We come here and we can do anything we want. You know, we have all this open to us. It didn't mean that I let go of that. And I still, you know, I would come home, and that's the repetition that was in the house was my mom and dad arguing about money. My dad saying, you're spending too much. My mom going, but we have money. Why aren't we spending it? And so it was this weird conflict that I kept seeing where I was like, but we do have money, but why can't we spend it? But I get that. I get that we need to save and we need to secure things in case something happens. So there was this conflict, right? And my choice growing up was to kind of stay in my lane and kind of go to church, you know, go to school, graduate from college, like all these little things you're supposed to do. Because I'm like, what am I gonna? Who am I to question what my parents are teaching me? You know, that was the first step. So I did that for years up until I was 21. So it was like 2015. No, I'm sorry, 2012, 2013. So that was like, I was 23, maybe 20, 22, 23. And that's when I was introduced to crypto, to Bitcoin. Once, you know, because up until that point, like I said, I was just kind of following the rules of the road, just doing my thing, going to school, at this point I was working. So going to work 9 to 5. I was working as an accountant, in my accounting office with my parents, with my brothers. And then when I was there, and I remember I watched this was the moment for me. I watched this documentary called Zeitgeist and Loose Change.
I've seen that one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was like 2008, 2009. So I watched that, and that really like cracked the egg for me. It really opened up my mind and cracked the egg of looking at the systems that currently existed and being aware of it and going, whoa, what is going on? What can I do about it? And then coming to the realization, I can't do anything. And I'm just going to go right back to doing my thing. And so I did that up until 2012. And then that's when I learned about Bitcoin. And once I learned about that, that's what kind of connected the dots for me in my head to, oh, here's a system that is broken. Here's this old mindset of scarcity. And now here's a way out of this system that is going to put us into true abundance. And I did see that, the abundance piece, the disconnection, like immediately, very early on, like 2008, 2009. No, I'm sorry, 2012, 2013. I saw that very quickly, which was why I was like so quick to invest in all in. Yeah. And everybody was like, you're nuts.
Well, let's bookmark that for 1 second, because the scarcity piece, I think there's another element that's really important that I heard in what you shared, is that how interesting that you lived in a household that had the polarity of living with a scarce or frugal mindset and living in an abundance mindset. I think so much of the content that I hear these days is heavily slated towards abundance. And in my opinion, you can get lost in that abundance mentality where it's like, oh, money's just going to fall from everywhere. And it's like way at the other end of the spectrum. Like, it's okay. And let's spend everything we have because the world is abundant. And that scarcity actually catches a bad rap. But I think there's also, I mean, you have an accounting background, right? There's definitely merit to being mindful and choiceful with how and where we spend our resources. So I don't think living at either end of the spectrum is valuable, but arriving at somewhere in the middle, would you say that that's something that you had to figure out for yourself? I don't want to assume that, but it's what it sounded like.
Yeah. So up until the point where the resources of crypto, of my investments, like became so abundant that, yeah, I went to that side of the spectrum. But up until that point, I was an accountant. I was, preparing a couple thousand tax returns a year. I did it for almost a decade. And so I had my QuickBooks, I had my budget. I was like this. I was like my dad, very how do you say that? Not control freak, but like the details, very detail oriented, and looking at every single little thing to the point where it was like stressing me out. Like it would stress me out if things weren't perfect, right? So up until the point that I had an abundance of resources come from crypto, I was like that. As soon as I got that abundance, man, I literally went from that side of the spectrum to the side that you just described, which was like, spend all the money. It doesn't matter. I'm going to be rich forever. And it was, I invested about $19,000 in about a year and a half, 2 years, it grew to 17 million. And so in that time, as it was growing, I was like, there's money just coming in every month, like this new money that was just coming in. And I was at one point for about, I'm going to say 2, maybe 3 months, I was spending an average of $20,000 to $30,000 a day. because
what?
I was
like what? Like just were you investing it, or are you just like,
No, mostly. And I would justify, I'd be like, I'm locking profits. I'm like, no, you're not, you're throwing money away. But I didn't, I was in that mindset. Like I almost felt like I needed to allow myself to go to that side of the spectrum, to feel it, to experience it. But no, it was going toward like a television or a car or, a rent towards a nice place, just random stuff.
I think that's probably the story for a lot of people who come into wealth like that so suddenly. I mean, I think we see it with celebrities, with professional athletes, college athletes who get that first big contract. Why do you think that's the most natural first thing to do for the majority of people, is like go and buy the expensive thing?
I think it depends on the person for sure, on what they're going to do. But I think the majority of the people, because of society and because of the world that we've all been born into, most are on the scarcity side. Like that's the majority of the population are on this side where they truly believe, okay, well, if I don't grind, if I don't put in the work, I'm not going to get any money. And so that keeps you in a state of survival. It keeps you in a state, in a tense state. And so I think that's just a natural, it's like, growing up, you either want what your parents have or the complete opposite, in my opinion. And to get to the middle, you have to allow the expression of both sides of the spectrum to then find the middle. And so that's what I think happens when you're giving so much abundance in such a short amount of time. It's almost natural to experience all sides of the spectrum to then figure out where you're supposed to be.
Yeah. Okay, man. So let's paint the picture a little bit more clearly. So you were working as an accountant for a while. And so it wasn't like you were like one of those dudes who's completely broke and all of a sudden wins 256 million on the Powerball, right? Like you knew what it was like to have some resources and take care of yourself. But all overnight, you went from not overnight, but you went from 17 grand to like millions of dollars. And then here you are. I'm interested in the relationship with risk, because especially coming from the background you came from, going back to 2012, 2013, investing 17 grand into Bitcoin back then, people still think you're crazy for doing that now. To do it back then, they probably wanted to institutionalize you.
Yeah. It was $250. Bitcoin.
Oh, $250. They're probably like, what the hell? You're throwing it in the garbage. You might as well burn it, right?
Yeah, literally. They literally said those words. My brother, I'll never forget. He's like, just take the $100 bill and just burn it, Otto. I'm like, all right, you can do that.
So how did you, cause I'll say for myself, right? I didn't finally get into crypto until, I don't know, maybe a year ago, when there was already some established evidence and data that like, okay, seems promising. That was where my threshold was, but we all have different thresholds for risk. So what put you in that mindset of saying, hey, you know what, this is a good gamble. It's a good risk for me to get into?
So I want to say that what allowed me to connect the dots quickly, because that's really what it is. It's not about risk or not. And I mean, okay, there is a portion of that, of like what feels risky and what doesn't feel risky. I think that's going to be different for every person, depending on where they're at. And I would even suggest to lean into the risk, because the risk is just a signal. Like the feeling of risk is just a signal from your body for something, which we can discuss, but it's a whole topic. But I would say for me, man, it was like looking at, it was first understanding my current system. So once I understood the current system and how it worked, when I read the Bitcoin white paper, and that's a part of it, I think also, like really allowing yourself to take in the information of the system, of this new system. And a lot of people are really falling into the flashiness of it all, like, because I think that's just like the distortion and the manipulation that happens from people that have nefarious plans for this tool. But initially it was just about understanding my current system, reading the new technology, and then seeing how it was fixing the issues. And what really solidified it for me, that made me feel like, oh, I can just invest into this 100%, was that there was already an ecosystem around it of other people that believed in it enough. And so it was almost like, oh, I don't need to believe in it for this to be worth something. There's a ton of people who believe in it. And so for me, I was like, okay, not only is this now an offering for people that like, hey, we can get out of the system, of this old system, but people were believing in it already, and they're already mining and they're already in it. So for me, I kind of betted on that really more than anything.
Yeah, it's interesting that brings back where we started off this conversation about external validation. Like, even though that's not validation of you, it's externally validating a separate entity that gives you the confidence to then take that leap, which is exactly what we do in community, right? Going all the way back to, hunting and foraging. So we all had to agree, hey, this is a good place to be hunting. There's, here's why. There's grazing grounds for the buffalo to come through, and these berries are good to eat, and here's why. And then there's enough evidence that we lay our faith and our trust in it. And at some point, like you said, all the evidence that we can possibly gather, there's still going to be that point where you say, okay, I've gathered the evidence. I feel like I'm ready to take this leap. And I think that's the part where, like you said, it varies so much from person to person. Is what is our risk tolerance? What is our willingness to take those leaps? And mine might be different from you based on so many different things. So what you said, that everyone has to be able to identify that for themselves. I want to go a little bit more into that piece, because even if we're not talking about money, just the relationship with risk is such an interesting thing.
Yeah. So whenever I'm teaching my clients, I talk about risk a lot, because risk, the emotions that we get from putting money into something or investing our energy into something, that's just a response. That's just your body telling you, that emotion that you're getting. It's just your body telling you if what you're doing, you've normalized, like you've done enough of it that you're like, okay, this is good. We've done it enough that, it's good to go. Or it's something new, something different, something that you're not used to. And so that's usually that negative feeling or the feeling that you get. That's when you've just never done it. That's really what it is. So depending on the person, I've noticed that, like, okay, so like, for example, I do this embodiment challenge where I tell people, find 5 people in this next week and give them money to their hands, to people that society hasn't normalized to give money to, right? So like, we tip the taxi driver, we tip the guy that opens the door for us when we get from valet or whatever that gets our car. But do we tip, the person that is, for example, the host at a restaurant? Does the host at a restaurant get tipped? Does, you're driving and you see somebody on the side of the road, should he get it? Should he get some money?
I was just thinking about the mailman or these other people.
The mailman, yeah.
And what's funny is they probably would say, I'm not allowed to take that. Right? There's some people
Probably,
that's like literally
not
against
normalized.
well, not even that. There's some people that I've tried tipping. They say, I can't accept that. It's against our protocol or something like that. It's interesting how society puts up those parameters.
Which makes me question, is like, why are they creating a policy to not tip these people? Like, do you want to not feel like, what I'm saying? It's like, oh, don't give them too much money. They'll think they're better than who they really are. I don't know. It's just a weird mindset to have. But so I tell people to do that, but to give money, that feels risky. So the reason I do that is so I want them to become aware of what that number is. Everybody's number is different to what feels risky and what doesn't, and it can change. Like for me, back in the day, $1,000 felt very, very risky. Now it's a little higher. It's around 10, 15,000. It's a little risky maybe, but it's going to change depending on where you're at. So it's just about awareness at the end of the day. It's just about relationship and understanding what that feels and looks like. And then fine tuning, okay, well, that feeling, that's when I want to give somebody $15, boom. And if you do that, if you practice that on a daily basis, then you start to fine tune of what your relationship is to those things, specifically money, if that's what we're talking about.
I like that. And let's just be really clear. How do you define risk? Because I think you're speaking about it as a sensation in the body. So if I was one of your clients, how would you help me to identify that feeling of risk versus some other feeling or sensation in my body?
So I always refer to like the difference between what feels good to what feels normal. or to what feels familiar. And so there is a difference between familiarity, like the tickle of familiarity, like, oh, I've normalized this, as opposed to, oh, I'm taking this thing that's actually healing my body, and so I'm feeling good from the healing properties of that thing. So there's the difference between those two. So when I tell people to try to hone in to the risk, it's to try to hone in to the feeling of familiarity that's on the negative end. So not the familiarity that feels good, but the familiarity that feels negative. Okay. So the familiarity that feels negative, all that is just, in my opinion, that's ancestral trauma. So risk, the feeling of risk is ancestral trauma. Whether it comes from our parents or our grandparents or us, it's coming from the past. It's coming from behind us. And so if you can fine tune to knowing the difference between what feels good, what feels familiar, hone into what feels familiar, and then find the lower vibrational of what feels familiar. That, in my opinion, is what risk is. That's the ancestral trauma of risk that's coming in. And that can be tweaked. That can be eliminated. That can be risen. It can be lowered.
Yeah, I really like that, man. The feeling of risk is ancestral trauma. That's gold right there. And following that up with, when you can identify that feeling and the negative association with it, getting curious and asking, well, why? Why do I have that feeling about this? And also having those conversations out in the open, because I think so many of us, the reason ancestral trauma gets passed from one generation to the next is because we don't actually talk about it. Mm-hmm. And get curious about, well, why? Why did we start coming up with this story that there's not enough for us? What actually happened? And then you trace it back, and maybe you ask your parents, and then they say, well, when I was growing up, my grandparents told me this. And we can only trace it back so far with who's actually here, but you can start to stitch the pieces together and start to say, oh, well, of course they had that story. It was useful and it helped them survive that time, but is it useful now? Do I still need that now?
And the truth is, we really do live in a world now it's not about scarcity anymore. It really is not. A lot of people go like, oh, we got to pay taxes. We got to still do the things that the government needs for them to continue supporting us and doing everything that we need to feel safe. When the reality is more than 90%, it's something like 95% of the services and things that we need to like be a society, it's all government contracts. It's like third parties. It's not the actual government itself. It's the government hiring private entities to do it. So we live in a world where the government can go away and we can still continue surviving. We can still continue thriving. We don't need them anymore. So it really is ancestral trauma. And that's why I officially say like, no, man, risk, anything that feels scarcity, tightness, divisiveness, that somebody needs to lose for me to win, that is ancestral. That is past. We can let that go. We don't need that anymore.
Yeah, and I would also say, this is just the distinction I've carried for myself, is that for me, there's a difference, and I know what it feels like between riskiness and recklessness. And that's usually where I draw the distinction for myself, because, for example, I'll go to the extreme end of the spectrum. Yeah, I've got a wife and I've got two small children. It doesn't feel like a good decision for me to jump off of like a 60-foot cliff into some, surging water. That might have excited me before I had kids, or somebody else, but it just feels reckless. It's like, well, what am I really going to gain out of that? Maybe there is something for me to gain, but it certainly doesn't outweigh the risk that goes along with it. It feels reckless to me. Like, why would I do that? Or if I said, you know what, I'm going to clear my bank account and go buy one of those $30,000 TV sets that I was talking about before, right? Like, I'm just going to go, let's just clear my bank account right now. That's reckless, right? That's not risk. So I don't know if you have.
So I have to, yeah. And so then you have to ask, right? If it feels reckless, why are you wanting to do it? If it is reckless, why are you wanting to do it in the first place? Mm-hmm. Then you have to go. And my opinion is that once you start to like really poke at it, you'll see that it's ancestral. It's something from the past. It's something that's behind you, and that you don't need anymore. The risk thing that you're saying, yeah, it's calculated. It's about listening to the signal. And that's the difference between what feels familiar and what is the good, what is actual like information you're actually using as a tool, to knowing that difference, to then be able to go, okay, now this is the one it's a calculated risk. Like I'm actually consciously choosing to do this, knowing that I'm doing it with this intention, and not just like I'm reacting from something from the past.
I love that, man. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
I love that you connected to ancestral trauma too, because I think that's something that so many people haven't even begun to examine for themselves. I know
Mm.
I've taken that for granted because it's something I've been exploring for myself for, I don't know, at least the past 10 years. But
Mm.
I mean, most people, they're like, what do you mean ancestors? What about my ancestors? Right? You just think of them as people in old photographs whose stories you don't really know.
Oh, the more I'm around Kale, you know Kale? Yeah. So the more I'm around him, I was in Maui a few weeks ago, or actually a month ago now. But that's all he talks about is your ancestors. Learn about your ancestors. You will change your life, because then you start to connect the dots. You go, oh man, that's where it comes from. And then you go, maybe I need to adjust this in my life. It doesn't work anymore. But yeah,
Totally,
ancestors.
man. Oh man, yeah. Kale was just on here a few weeks ago, and we were just jamming about that whole thing, man. Yeah,
Oh
we
yeah, there you
we
go.
definitely connected on that. So, all right, so let's talk about some of the exciting stuff moving forward, right? The decentralized future. Now, I'm just going to assume that there's still people who are listening here that are like, Bitcoin what? And they don't know what decentralization is. So can you give us like the instant crash course on it? And then we could talk about the fun stuff, because I'm also interested in what the future could look like as we navigate this decentralization process.
Yeah, the best way that I've come to analogize this is first of all, what's happening here is there's a major shift happening. We're going from centralized systems to decentralized. All that means is, instead of us, when we go online and we go to Instagram, we go to Facebook, or here we go to Zoom, we're accessing central servers. We're actually accessing servers that are owned by a corporation or by a few groups of people that came together and created these servers. But we're not decentralized. We're not, there's like, let's say 1 million people accessing the same point access point. Where in decentralization, it flips it. It flips the whole thing, where everyone that is those 1 million people are these servers, and the operating system is in everybody's device. So instead of us using our devices to access central servers and use their operating system, we're downloading the operating system to our individual devices and then using the highways as the connection to communicate in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Yeah.
That's the flip. That's essentially the flip that we're doing. Centralized to decentralized. And then on top of that, you have blockchain. So blockchain is the operating system. That's essentially the idea that you can connect devices to each other without going through a central hub. The best comparison is Napster. I don't know if you remember Napster or LimeWire.
Oh yeah.
So that software back in the day that would allow you to connect to other, it's called peer-to-peer transfers, but it will allow you to connect to other people's computers and download data from their computer. And like they would give it up. There was just this like community of data sharing.
Yeah.
And so the government didn't like that.
A lot of people. Yeah.
It did. Yeah. I mean, it was like, things were being shifted around without buying. It was all for free. And so, yeah, it pissed off a lot of people. The company got taken down. But in my opinion, it was like a test drive, to see if the concept could work. To where now because we flipped it on them, the operating system is in our devices. We don't need to test it in these centralized servers anymore, these centralized sandboxes. So now we have this operating system, crypto, and not having those central servers, you've taken them away. We can now access each other from peer to peer, from me to you, using that operating system, that new crypto operating system. It started off with Bitcoin, which was for finances, where now it's like online computers. Like we can essentially create any sort of application, any sort of program, and facilitate any sort of transaction in the real world. To where now it's like it's essentially becoming a tool that's being abused by evil, and so there's this pull towards escapism, right? Towards pulling people into the metaverse and like, get away from real life. Like let's just stay in here. That's what I think is the evil plan with crypto, and really with the internet. Like I think that it all started in this way to decentralize, and then the evil came in and was like, no, we got to centralize this. This is not good. I think it started with the internet, and then now it's the same thing is happening with crypto. It was decentralized at first, and now they're starting to centralize it little by little. And so it was like, no, we can't do that. Stop.
So you think that the metaverse, at least to some degree, I know there's no broad strokes, but is a like kind of like a bait and switch. Like, okay,
Yeah.
all of you Bitcoiners out there, come and get lost in this space.
Yeah. And actually, in my opinion, what's happening right now with Elon Musk buying Twitter, his whole reason for buying Twitter is because of freedom of speech. And so he's saying like, oh, we got to make sure that you're human, right? Which is weird because like, why would I need to? Anyway, let's push that aside. The natural progression that Twitter is going towards right now, the first thing that they did was they opened up the profile picture to be an NFT. So now you can actually connect your NFT, your Web 3.0 wallet, to your Twitter account, right? And so the natural progression of that is to then make that into a marketplace, make it into an ecosystem, make it into a place where you can monetize and you can make money, right, on Twitter, to where eventually you start to become so dependent on that system that then they'll flip it on you. And that
before we know it, we've got all the big banks all over again, right? They just changed their costume.
Exactly. And so that's right now it's a choice. Right now it's like, oh, this is so glamorous. This is so beautiful. Let's use Twitter. We can use it to make money, and you will be able to. But if you normalize it, right? The more you use those systems, and the more you normalize those systems, it will be that much harder every day that you do it to get out of it and you work on something else. And so you'll become dependent on it. And that's the trap.
Which is why so many people will have a hard time getting behind cryptocurrencies, right? Currencies that don't actually exist in material form when they realize that. I mean, when was the last time that I actually had cash and coins in my pocket, right? It's all numbers on the screen. Now we're just calling it Bitcoin instead of US dollars, right? So it's interesting how there's the narrative that we have around things. And my focus on the decentralization conversation, I know the finances is a really big part of all this, but I don't think there's actually that much separation between finance and political power and larger governing bodies. I've always been of the belief that what needs to happen, because there's so many people on this planet with so many different belief systems, so many different wants and desires, that there has to be eventually some sort of fracturing where smaller communities of people will begin governing themselves again. I don't know how far in the future this is. I mean, if it were to happen tomorrow, it would have to be some sort of like cataclysmic apocalyptic event, I think. But eventually, I imagine a future where my children, who are just little kids right now, they're going to live in a world where the people who make decisions actually know who they are. They actually know who they're making decisions on behalf of. So maybe a couple hundred people at the most instead of millions.
Interesting. So I would love to share my perspective.
Yeah.
So how I see it, I don't think there needs to be any cataclysmic event for this. Although I would agree that, when you're wanting to make a big shift, one of two things need to happen. You need to repeat it over and over every day and normalize it. Or yes, a big event that is going to shake everybody out of their, normal life and go, whoa, what's going on? I think it's going to be the first. I think it's going to be the latter. I think it'll be little by little. We won't need a big event, and here's why. Blockchain itself is a tool. The idea of blockchain is out. It's like opening the bottle, the genie comes out. Now the genie, I'm here, I exist, and so you have good and evil now staring at this genie and going, oh, this is a new tool we can start to use and start to, the evil are going, we can use this to still push our power up and still gain more land. And, and they're looking at it from that perspective. And then you have
that's where we have to like, mwahaha. I wish I had a sound for it right now. Mwahaha.
Yeah, it's like Burns, like
there you go.
I don't even know the actual app, but it's like excellent.
Yeah,
excellent. So you have the evil doing that, cool, and then you have good, right? Good men, and they even have that saying, "Evil wins when good men do nothing," and that's I think what's happening right now. Again, it first happened with the internet, and they won. It got completely they, as in the mindset, the ideology, right? There's no they, in my opinion. I mean, there is a they. There's like a small group of people that are like driving this thing, but there's a mindset, and that's the bigger issue. That's the bigger issue. What they've normalized a mindset where somebody needs to lose for me to win, capitalism, where it's justified to to lie, cheat, when it's because you're trying to make a buck, when it's like, well, that's capitalism. Somebody's got to lose. That's what it is. And
hashtag capitalism, right?
Like, yeah, hashtag capitalism. And so, man, I did a post recently. It was like, capitalism is a real virus. And I lost 450 followers because of that. and it's like, but did you read the caption? Yeah. But it had to do with this and like letting go of that mindset. But that's what it is. You have this massive mindset that is with this new tool that evil is infiltrating now. And I call it evil because that mindset is evil. It's divisive. It's tense. It's destructive. It creates wars. It's all this stuff. And it's like, we need to let that go. But, that's a tough one. That's probably the toughest one. And so we're bringing, even the people in the crypto space that I've known for years that love the space and love what it stands for, they're still like, well, you learned your lesson, you lost it. Like, they have this mindset of like, well, you're in it by yourself. This is what it is. So when good men yield the tool for good, meaning like when we actually use it with the intention of bringing back the energy back into itself instead of giving it up towards a centralized power, you start to realize that like, oh, we're not going to win this on the global level. There's no way. And that's what a lot of these projects are trying to do. They're trying to launch these projects on a global scale. And it's like, dude, you're fighting globalists. What are you doing? Like global level launches is their bread and butter. Like, you're not going to win. And so that's what I'm seeing in the space right now. You have all these projects that are amazing, but they're doing it very publicly. And so it's attracting the evil. It's attracting the people that are like, oh, how can we come in here and take as much as we can and like bring this thing down so that we can make it better ourselves. There's that mindset like that. And so, to kind of build on what you just said, the fracturing, I 100% agree with that. I think that the true decentralization using crypto is not going to be at the global level. It's going to be at the local level, where you're going to start with 1,000 people, 500 people, and you create a little system that is not theirs. And then you just you create your own reserve, your own currency. And that's essentially what's happening right now. You have these DAOs, they're called DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. And they're using NFTs as a membership wall, because that's a whole other thing too. When the thing is public or private, public is their system. It's their jurisdiction. It's underneath maritime law, which is the satanic law. It's the inversion of nature. And then privacy is godly. It's actually on the law of the land, common law. That's the law of mankind. Literally, it's like when it's private, which means it's like it's all the things. It's like the flow of energy. Instead of the flow of energy going out, right? Validation going to external. The validation comes from within. It comes from, you don't need the external things to come in. You actually, if anything, you have so much self-validation, so much self-worth that you need something to represent it going out. And that's what I believe, what money actually is. It's just an energy that represents the self-worth inside of us. And so crypto is giving us the ability to show that, to actually show a representation of that. And how I structure it for people is, in society, they've normalized the flow of energy, of money, up into a pyramid, right? Towards a point, one specific point. And if you actually look at pyramids, the flow of energy goes up and then out. And so it's literally throwing money into oblivion. Where I want to say, no, let's create a DAO, NFT-based DAO, and shift. And I'm not saying flip the pyramid, because that's the same shit. It's just going down. But flip the energy in to itself. And then what happens? You create a toroidal field. And so I'm saying, let's let go of capitalism and take on toroidilism, which is feeding back the energy into itself, where it doesn't need external sources of money or flow or energy. It comes from itself.
I see what you did there, Otto. I see how you went all the way back to the beginning. You brought that external validation. That was clever, man. I really like it, dude. That was dope. I mean, just the way you laid that out. Obviously, I know you could go 1,000 levels deeper into that, and I would encourage people who are listening to come check out what you got, because I love your mind, dude, and I really love the way that you see things. And I agree. The way that we're going to be able to change those things is by having these intellectual conversations, educating ourselves and each other, and then making these choices. Simply put, right? Like what I heard in that was, okay, there's got to be like a rising man crypto at some point. And And I remember I thought back when I lived in Ojai, Ojai, California, for those of you guys who know Ojai. There, it was such a small town, and they had their own currency that they would use at the farmers markets and the local stores. And I mean, I don't think it ever really took off, but they were trying that. They're like, hey, let's try and keep this. And it was honored at all the local businesses within the, town lines. So same concept, right? If we can learn to have something that we all place value in, right? That we're all putting value into, and then agreeing upon that, then we can start to have these small
Well, what's
systems.
cool, but here's what's really cool about these DAOs is that the value you can actually, so you can create a very private DAO and it's blocked by a membership that you can like apply to go into, or you have to do some sort of sweat equity. There's a few different ways that you can layer it. It's all about gamifying it, right? Making it fun. But essentially these DAOs, you can, so it's really what a DAO is. It's a way to facilitate the pooling of money. So, essentially the first thing that people are going to do is they're going to take their money out of the Swift system and put it into the blockchain system. Just that shift alone, that's taking the energy that you've created, right? People save money. That means that you put in the time and effort of your worth into the job that you did and started accumulating that energy into now this account, this bank account that you have. So that's a representation of your energy, of your worth. And so all I'm saying is take the worth out of their hands and put the worth in your hands. Just that step alone takes away the power. Their power. Imagine if everybody did that overnight, it'd be over. And so not only are we doing that, but now we're taking that worth and we're tapping into other people's worths and other marketplaces that exist in the crypto space. So your ecosystem, your DAO, depending on how much money is in there, it's going to make a certain amount of money because of tapping into these other DAOs. And so there's actually going to be abundance flowing into it, whether the people want it to or not. At that point.
Oh man, I love that. We're going to have to come back and do another one because there's so many other little avenues that I want to jump into, but I got to get you out of here on time. Yeah. And I know you and I could jam for hours, man. So we will do that someday. So let me just hit you with a few rapid fire questions because I want to get you out of here on time, and then you can tell everybody where to go and hear more about all the amazing things you got to share.
Yeah.
You ready for the fire?
Let's do it.
All right. So what's one thing you've learned in your life that you wish you knew back when you were 18?
Failure is good.
Yeah.
Fail hard.
That's the only thing they need to teach high schoolers, right? Like, hey,
just keep failing, guys.
No, actually, if you fail, you're out of high school or out of college. It's like totally backwards. Okay. Anyway, lightning round. Here we go. What do you think is the most important value to have as a man?
Awareness of like reactions.
Awesome. And what is one thing the world needs more or less of from men right now?
From men, we need more holding space. Ooh. Can you imagine if everybody just started holding space for each other?
Yeah.
And less external validation needs.
Boom, like a bow tie on it, man. Let's put the cherry on top. The great Oto Gomes, everybody. Tell everybody where they can go follow you, find out more about what you're doing, because you fucking rock, dude.
Thank you, man. You can find me on Instagram. I have a large account on there, at Oto Gomes. My website is otogomes.live. And make sure you follow me on YouTube. I'm on there as well. I'm starting to put out a lot of consistent content now on a pretty much on a daily basis, if not weekly. But yeah, check me out.
Awesome. And for this is not a joke for all the people out there who are going to follow you for the first time. Make sure you got the official Oto Gomes, like at Oto Gomes. I was like, dude, what the hell is Oto putting out there? And then I asked Julian, he's like, oh, dude, he's got all these like fake accounts, people trying to pretend that they're him. So make sure you guys got the real one. And if you're not sure which one it is, we'll put it in the show notes and everybody.
Yeah. Type out my full name. It's OT as in Tom, OGOM as in Mary, ES. And make sure, because like once I saw Oto Gomes 35 and then Oto Gomes 22, I'm like, oh no, if they have 22 and 35, how many other numbers are there? And so, yeah.
Oh, dang, dude. Well, hey man, They say that's one of the greatest signs that you made it, right? When you got people making
Right.
fake accounts about you, dude, you're there.
It's the greatest form of flattery. Thank you guys for scamming people on my name. I appreciate it.
Yeah, the greatest form of flattery used to be imitation. So I guess it still is in a way. We just found new ways to do it.
Yeah.
Otto, man, so good to reconnect with you, bro. Thanks for making the time here today. I look forward to jamming with you some more. And yeah, man, let's do it again sometime.
Awesome. Actually, I'll see you in a couple of weeks where we flip the script.
There you go. Yeah,
and
then I get to sit in the hot seat.
There you go.
Awesome,
All right,
bro.
brother.
Take care of yourself.
Talk soon.